One of the best ways to analyze the course of the war is to analyze the battlefield map. As the Pioneer team, we share the developments on the battle map with you every day. So what do the maps tell us in terms of the overall course of the war? What are the changes in the regions where armies are in control? Which cities have seen military activities? Where have new troops been deployed? What kind of the preparation strategy does the Ukrainian army follow before launching a counterattack? Let's look at the answer to these questions together. Ever since the Ukrainian army's major offensive has been on the agenda, the Russian occupiers has been showing signs of anxiety. It is noticed that the Russians are trying to take a defensive position despite the moves made by the Ukrainian army at the strategic points before the big counterattack. It is still a matter of curiosity whether the offensive moves expected from the Ukrainian army will start from a single point or whether operations will be organized from more than one front line. While all these curiosities were on the agenda, a move by the Ukrainian army gave an answer to the question in mind. After the landing of the Ukrainian army, the eyes turned to Kherson, as a result of the fact that the officials of the Russian occupiers started to leave the occupied parts of Kherson. One of the steps taken by Russian occupiers, fearing the expected counterattacks of the Ukrainian army, is the relocation of the people in the settlements to other regions. On the other hand, this is an attempt to evacuate cities and make them insignificant, while on the other hand, it creates the possibility of using civilians as human shield. On the other hand, it can be interpreted as a demographic move by the Russian occupiers. In any case, the Ukrainian army's landing on the eastern bank of the Dnieper River has alarmed the Russian army. There are reports that the Russian occupiers have abandoned and evacuated their positions in the Kherson region and Zaporizhia region. It was announced that the evacuation of about 70,000 people from the Zaporizhia is targeted. This news shows that the Russians are giving up some of the occupied territories. The landing of the Ukrainian army on the eastern banks of the Dnieper River also shows that the Crimea is a target. According to the statements of the Ukrainian General Staff, Russian officials in the city of Skadovsk in the Kherson Oblast have left the city. Kherson, which was the first region entered by the Russian invaders last year, was recaptured last summer as a result of powerful offensive by Ukrainian forces. After the recapture of Kherson, the Russian invaders managed to hold on to parts of the region, but remained trapped there. Today, the Ukrainian army landed east of the Dnieper River and established positions there, indicating that the liberation of the rest of the region is on the route of the big counteroffensive that is about to begin. The Russian authorities have started evacuation to secure themselves before the Ukrainian army arrives. Yevhen Balitsky, who was assigned to the region by Russia, described the decision to evacuate 18 settlements as a necessary security measure. However, the statements of the residents overshadowed these explanations. The civilians, who were supposedly evacuated from the cities, stated that their accommodation and food needs were not met where they were taken, and the Russian soldiers were mostly present in the camps. In addition, Russian officials also took refuge in these evacuation camps. The reason why the Russians are forcibly displacing people in this region is not security. As the Ukrainian army was getting very close to the region, the people were preparing to welcome the army. Those who were preparing for the arrival of the Ukrainian army were trying to support them by storing water and food and not to allow the Russian invaders to benefit from these materials. It was announced that more than 1,600 people were evacuated from the region, which showed a serious demographic mobility in the last week. With these moves, the Russians aim to change the structure of the inhabitants of the region after the war by removing people from their homes. In this way, the demographic structure may change, and after the Russians lose military control, they may try to claim rights in the regions they were withdrawn from the occupation through so-called plebiscites. The Russian occupiers are also trying to move doctors and technical workers to the Russian points, because the Russian army, which has a huge human resource problem, cannot afford to fill its deficiencies in health and technical works. This plan of the Russian army, which is trying to get the support from the civilian population living in the region, fails, because it cannot find the support it is looking for from the public, even by force. Another aim of the Russian invaders who are trying to evacuate the cities is to use the houses and buildings in the evacuated cities as a military headquarters. The Russian occupiers, whose military points have been identified by the Ukrainian intelligence, are trying to gain new positions to protect themselves from the upcoming Ukrainian army offensive. Therefore, the evacuations carried out by the Russian occupiers under the pretext of protecting civilians are actually nothing more than an attempt by the Russian occupiers to establish their own headquarters. The Russian occupiers are having difficulty taking measures against the offensive of the Ukrainian army. The lack of troops and equipment leaves the Russians in a difficult situation. It is reported that the Donetsk People's Republic, DNR, the separatist government established in Donetsk, is trying to integrate its soldiers into the Russian army. Attempts have been reported for the soldiers operating on behalf of the DNR to join the Russian army with 2 years contract and wear Russian uniforms. It is clear from these actions that the Russian occupiers are seriously worried and unplanned about the great counteroffensive of the Ukrainian army. It is expected that the ongoing strong offensive on the Ukrainian army in Bakhmut will be reinforced by the moves in Donetsk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia regions and will form the backbone of the Ukrainian army's counteroffensive. The fact that the Ukrainian army has increased its effective operations in Bakhmut in recent days suggests that the offensive starting from here could be the main attack. The possibility of small steps turning into bigger steps was voiced by the Ukrainian politicians. Alexander Kornienko, first deputy speaker of the Ukraine's parliament, the Verkhovna Rada, said on the sidelines of the Leonard Murray conference in Tallinn, Estonia, on Saturday that the Ukrainian troops had achieved something big around the city of Bakhmut, which has been devastated for several months. For the last 2 days, we have taken back 2.5 kilometers of our territory, Kornienko said. It's not huge, but it's enough for our soldiers to feel they did something great, because it was not only about Russia getting out, but about the creative thinking and bravery of our guys. It is clear that these decisive steps will strengthen the Ukrainian offensive. In war, you can inflict heavy losses on the enemy with effective operations. But sometimes small blows can lead to a big victorious with the psychological superiority, just like fishing for a big fish by hooking a small fish or a bait. Valery Zaluzhny, commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine, spoke in an interview about the heavy losses suffered by the Russians. Zaluzhny, the invaders, came deliberately. Now they are inflicting heavy losses there, including the Donetsk direction of operations and the Bakhmut region, he said. After these words, he said that although the invaders are constantly inflicting heavy losses, their commanders continue to send Russian soldiers to the front, and that the invaders who are trying to take the lives of the Ukrainians are forced to stay on the front because of the Putin's ambitions, even though they are constantly inflicting heavy losses. Under the current circumstances, it can be said that the Ukrainian army has begun to circle the Russian invaders from 3 sides. In the east, an offensive can be expected along the lines of Donetsk and Luhansk, where the attacks are still ongoing. This would mean breaking the backbone of the well-worn Russian army. An offensive to the south and southeast against the occupied part of the Zaporizhia region could push the Russians back. Finally, the Ukrainian forces landing east of the Dnieper River on the shores of the Kherson could follow a path to the south and east. One of the important features of this last path is the strategic region of the Ukrainian army in the Black Sea region. Given the capabilities of this region and the nuclear power plant facilities in Zaporizhia, the Ukrainian army's advance along this line would mean pushing back the Russian invaders from their first points of advance and making significant gains in the terms of energy and logistics. Moreover, if the Ukrainian army advances from the eastern banks of the Dnieper River to the south, the Ukrainian army will be in control of the roads leading to Crimea. The recent drone operations of the Ukrainian army in Crimea had already suggested that the moves towards this region were coming. Mikhail Podolyak had also recently stated in a statement that Crimea would be liberated within 5 months. With the new long-range missiles that the Ukrainian army has, it is highly likely that it will carry out operations on the Crimean road from the points where it is currently landing. In order to fully control the Kerch Strait, Crimea's only land connection, a linear course must be followed south of the Kherson region. The Ukrainian army has intensified its operations around the Kerch Bridge. Now it is expected that one of the main line of the counterattack will be here. From which point do you think the Ukrainian army will start the big offensive? What do you think about the Russian authorities leaving the Russian-occupied areas in Kherson and Zaporizhia regions? What do you think about the evacuations of civilians from the areas left by the Russian authorities means? We are waiting for your comments. Stay tuned for more.